The boy was 12 years old when he first touched a piano. He didn't know it then, but that moment would change everything about his life. But let me start from the beginning, because every story has a beginning, and his started in a place most people would rather forget. He lived with his mother in a small apartment on the east side of the city, the kind of neighborhood where sirens were more common than birdsong, and where people learned early to keep their heads down and their expectations lower. His mother worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. During the day, she cleaned offices in the business district. At night, she sorted laundry at the hospital 3 bus rides away. Sometimes he wouldn't see her for days except for the notes she left on the kitchen counter and the food she prepared and wrapped in plastic for him to heat up. They didn't have much. His clothes came from donation bins at the community center. His shoes always seemed to have holes in them, no matter how carefully he walked. For dinner, they ate a lot of rice and beans, sometimes with a little chicken if his mother got paid that week. But she never complained, and neither did he. That was just how things were. School was hard in a different way, not the learning part. He was smart. Everyone said so. His teachers would shake their heads and say things like, "So much potential," and if only he had more support at home. What they didn't understand was that his mother supported him more than anyone. She just didn't have time to show up to parent-teacher conferences or help with homework at night. She was too busy making sure he had a roof over his head. The other kids at school didn't make things easier. Children can be cruel, especially to those who are different, and he was different. He wore the same 3 shirts in rotation. He brought his lunch in old grocery bags because they couldn't afford a proper lunchbox. He never had money for field trips or book fairs. The other kids noticed these things, and they made sure he knew they noticed. So he learned to be invisible. He sat in the back of classrooms. He ate lunch alone in the corner of the cafeteria. He walked home by himself, taking the long way to avoid the groups of boys who liked to push him around for entertainment. Being invisible was safer than being seen. But here's the thing about being invisible. When no one is watching you, you have time to watch everything else. And what he watched, more than anything, was music. It started with the old radio in their apartment. His mother kept it on the kitchen windowsill, tuned to a classical station that came in fuzzy but clear enough. She said the music reminded her of her own mother, who had died before he was born. So every morning, while he ate his cereal before school, he listened to piano concertos and symphonies. He didn't know the names of the composers or the pieces. He just knew that something about the music made him feel less alone. Then one day, everything changed. He was walking home from school, taking his usual long route, when he passed by a church he had never really noticed before. It was old and a little run down, with peeling paint and a crooked cross on the steeple, but the doors were open, and coming from inside was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Someone was playing the piano. He stopped on the sidewalk, frozen. The music was like nothing he had heard on the radio. It was raw and real, full of mistakes and hesitations, but also full of something he couldn't name, something that pulled at his chest and made his eyes sting. Without thinking, he walked up the steps and through the open doors. The inside of the church was dim and cool. Dust floated in the colored light streaming through stained glass windows. And there, at the front of the empty sanctuary, sat an old woman at an upright piano. Her hair was white and her fingers were bent with age, but she played with her eyes closed and a small smile on her face. He stood in the back and listened until she finished. When she opened her eyes and saw him standing there, she didn't seem surprised or annoyed. She just smiled wider and waved him forward. "You like music?" she asked. He nodded, suddenly shy. "Come here, sit." She patted the bench beside her, and he walked down the aisle like he was in a dream. When he sat next to her, she placed his hands on the keys. Her own hands, wrinkled and spotted with age, covered his. "Press down," she said, gently. He pressed, and a note rang out. Just one note. But it was the most perfect sound he had ever made in his life. The old woman's name was Mrs. Chen, and she had been the church pianist for 40 years. She was retired now, but she still came every afternoon to play for an hour or two. Nobody else used the piano, she explained. The church was too poor to afford a real music program, so she played alone. For herself and for God, she said. "Can you teach me?" the boy asked. She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were sharp despite her age, and he felt like she was seeing something inside him that even he didn't know was there. "I'm too old to teach," she finally said. "My hands don't work like they used to. But you can come and practice, every day if you want. The piano will teach you if you're willing to listen." From that day on, the church became his second home. Every afternoon after school, he would slip through those old wooden doors and sit at the piano. Mrs. Chen was usually there, sitting in the front pew, reading her Bible or just listening. She didn't give him formal lessons, but she would offer a word here and there. Softer on that part. Feel the music. Don't just play it. Let your hands relax. He had no sheet music and no way to buy any. So he went to the public library and used the old computers there to find videos of pianists playing famous pieces. He would watch the same video dozens of times, memorizing where the fingers went, humming the melody until it was burned into his brain. Then he would go to the church and try to recreate what he had seen. It was slow. It was frustrating. Some days, he wanted to slam the piano lid shut and never come back. His fingers were clumsy. The notes came out wrong. The music in his head never matched the music that came from the keys. But he kept going. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. And slowly, so slowly that he almost didn't notice, he got better. By the time he was 14, he could play simple pieces from memory. By 15, he was tackling composers he had only heard on his mother's fuzzy radio. By 16, something had shifted. The music didn't feel like something he was doing anymore. It felt like something that was flowing through him, using his hands to escape into the world. Mrs. Chen noticed too. One afternoon, after he finished playing a piece that had taken him 3 months to learn, she put down her Bible and looked at him with tears in her eyes. "I've been coming to this church for 50 years, she said quietly. "I've heard a lot of music in that time. But I've never heard anyone play like you." He didn't know what to say. So he said nothing. But her words planted something in his heart. A tiny seed of hope that maybe, just maybe, he was meant for something more than being invisible. He was 16 years old when he saw the flyer on the bulletin board at school. It announced a citywide music competition, open to all students. The prize was a $10,000 scholarship and the chance to perform at the biggest concert hall in the city. His hands were shaking as he tore off one of the paper tabs at the bottom with the registration information. The competition was being held at Lincoln Preparatory Academy, the most elite private school in the city. A place where kids wore uniforms that cost more than his mother made in a month. A place where he would be a complete outsider. But for the first time in his life, he didn't want to be invisible. He wanted to be heard. The morning of the competition, he woke up before sunrise. He couldn't sleep anyway. His stomach was twisted in knots. And every time he closed his eyes, he saw that flyer in his mind. Today was the day. There was no going back now. He had told his mother about the competition a week ago. She had been sitting at the kitchen table after a double shift, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, when he finally found the courage to speak. He explained about the scholarship, about the chance to perform, about everything he had been working toward for the past 4 years. She had listened without saying a word. Then she stood up, walked over to him, and hugged him so tight he thought his ribs might crack. "I always knew," she whispered into his hair. "I always knew you were special." She had taken the day off work to see him perform. It was the first day off she had taken in 3 years. That fact alone made his heart feel like it might burst. He spent an hour getting ready. Which was funny because he didn't have many choices to make. He picked his cleanest shirt. A button-down that was slightly too big because it came from the donation bin. His pants were dark and didn't have any holes, which was a victory. His shoes were the problem. The soles were coming apart on both of them, and no amount of glue seemed to fix them anymore. He did his best to make them look presentable, but he knew anyone who looked closely would see the truth. His mother made him breakfast, even though she was exhausted. Eggs and toast. His favorite. She sat across from him and watched him eat, with a look on her face he couldn't quite read. Pride, maybe, or worry. Probably both. "You don't have to win anything," she said as he finished. "You just have to play. That's all. Just play like you play at that church, and everything will be fine." He nodded, but the knots in his stomach didn't loosen. The bus ride to Lincoln Preparatory Academy took almost an hour. He sat in the back with his folder of sheet music on his lap, watching the city change outside the window. The buildings got nicer, the streets got cleaner, the cars got more expensive. By the time the bus stopped at his destination, he felt like he had traveled to a different country. Lincoln Prep didn't look like a school. It looked like a palace. The main building was made of white stone, with tall columns at the entrance. The lawn was perfectly green, perfectly trimmed, like something from a magazine. Students walked around in matching uniforms, laughing and talking like they owned the place, which, in a way, they did. He stood at the front gate for a long moment, afraid to go in. Everything about this place screamed that he didn't belong. The voice in his head, the one that had kept him invisible for so many years, was telling him to turn around. Go home. Forget about the competition. Who did he think he was? But then he thought about his mother taking the day off work. He thought about Mrs. Chen and the piano at the church. He thought about all those hours of practice. All those days of teaching himself note by note, video by video. If he turned around now, all of that would mean nothing. So he took a deep breath and walked through the gate. The auditorium was in the east wing of the building. He followed the signs, trying not to stare at everything around him. The hallways had actual paintings on the walls. Not posters like at his school. The floors were polished marble that clicked under his broken shoes. Display cases showed off trophies and awards going back decades. This was a place where winners came from. Champions. Not kids from the east side who taught themselves piano in empty churches. When he reached the auditorium, his breath caught in his throat. It was the biggest room he had ever seen. Rows and rows of velvet seats stretched back from a massive stage. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, sparkling in the light. And everywhere, were people who looked like they belonged in a place like this. Parents in expensive clothes chatted near the entrance, holding programs and coffee cups. Kids his age carried instrument cases that probably cost more than his family's car. Everyone seemed to know everyone else. They called out to each other, hugged, laughed about summer vacations to places he had only seen in movies. He found a seat in the very back row and tried to disappear. It didn't work. "Hey!" A voice came from his left. He looked up to see a boy about his age sliding into the seat next to him. The boy wore a perfectly pressed blazer with some kind of crest on the pocket. His hair was styled with gel, and his watch looked like it cost more than a year's rent. Two other boys stood behind him, smirking. "You lost or something?" the boy in the blazer asked. His voice was friendly on the surface, but his eyes were cold. "No," he replied quietly. "I'm here for the competition." The boy in the blazer raised his eyebrows. He looked him up and down, taking in the oversized shirt, the worn pants, the broken shoes. Then he laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh. "You? Seriously?" The boy turned to his friends. "Did you hear that? He's here for the competition." The other two boys laughed too. One of them whispered something he couldn't hear, but the word charity was clear enough. "What instrument do you play?" the boy in the blazer asked, still smiling that cold smile. "Kazoo? Tambourine? Piano," he said. Something flickered in the boy's eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or annoyance. "Piano is my instrument," the boy said. And the friendliness was completely gone from his voice now. "I've been training since I was 3 years old. My teacher studied at the best conservatory in the country. I've won every competition I've ever entered." He leaned closer. "So whatever you think you're doing here, you're wasting your time. This isn't a place for people like you." He didn't respond. What could he say? Everything the boy said was probably true. He had years of professional training. He had the best teachers. He had every advantage that money could buy. And what did he have? A donated shirt and 4 years of practicing alone in a church. The boy in the blazer smirked at his silence and stood up. "Good luck," he said, making the words sound like an insult. Then he walked away with his friends, laughing. After they left, he sat very still. His hands were shaking. The voice in his head was screaming now, telling him he was a fool for coming here, that everyone was laughing at him, that he should leave before he embarrassed himself even more. But he stayed. The competition began an hour later. One by one, students were called to the stage to perform. He watched from his seat in the back, his stomach churning. The other performers were good. Really good. They played complicated pieces with perfect technique, their fingers moving across keys and strings like they were born to do it. The audience applauded politely after each performance, and the judges nodded and made notes on their clipboards. The boy in the blazer performed near the middle of the lineup. He played a piece that was technically difficult and emotionally empty. His fingers were fast and accurate. But there was something missing, something that made music more than just notes in the right order. Still, the audience gave him a standing ovation, and his parents in the front row beamed with pride. Then a voice came over the speakers, calling a number. His number. His legs felt like they were made of concrete as he stood up. The walk to the stage seemed to take forever. He could feel eyes on him from every direction. He heard whispers as he passed, and he didn't need to hear the words to know what they were saying. They were looking at his clothes, his shoes, his folder of hand-copied sheet music. They were judging him before he played a single note. He climbed the steps to the stage, and the lights hit him like a wave of heat. The auditorium was even bigger from up here. All those faces staring up at him. All those people waiting for him to fail. At the center of the stage sat a grand piano. It was the most beautiful instrument he had ever seen. Black and gleaming, perfectly polished, like something from a dream. He walked toward it slowly, his broken shoes quiet on the wooden stage. Somewhere in the audience, someone coughed. It sounded like the word pathetic. Laughter rippled through the crowd. He sat down on the bench. The piano keys stretched out before him, white and black, waiting. A judge with glasses spoke into a microphone. "Name and piece, please. Name and piece, please." He leaned toward the small microphone on the piano. His voice came out barely above a whisper, but in the silent auditorium, everyone heard it. Chopin. Ballade No. 1. In G minor, a gasp went through the crowd. He understood why. The piece was one of the most difficult in the classical piano repertoire. Professional pianists spent years mastering it. For a kid from nowhere, with no formal training, to attempt it at a competition like this was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. The boy in the blazer laughed out loud from somewhere in the audience. "This should be good," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. More laughter, more whispers, more judgment. He placed his fingers on the keys. They were trembling. Everything inside him was screaming to run, to give up, to accept that he didn't belong here and never would. But then he closed his eyes, and something shifted. He wasn't in the auditorium anymore. He was back at the church, alone with the old piano, playing for no one but himself. He could hear Mrs. Chen's voice in his memory. "Feel the music. Don't just play it. Let your hands relax." He took one long breath, and he began to play. The first note hung in the air like a question. It was soft, gentle, almost hesitant. The kind of sound that made people lean forward without realizing they were doing it. The kind of sound that made the laughter die in their throats. He kept his eyes closed. He didn't want to see the audience. He didn't want to see the judges or the chandeliers or the boy in the blazer waiting for him to fail. He only wanted to feel the keys under his fingers and let the music take him somewhere else. The opening of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 is like a door creaking open into another world. It starts slowly, carefully, like someone walking through fog. The melody is simple at first, just a few notes repeating, searching for something. But underneath that simplicity is a sadness so deep it almost hurts to hear. He had practiced this piece for 8 months. 8 months of playing it over and over in the empty church until his fingers knew every note by heart. 8 months of listening to recordings on the library computers, studying how the great pianists shaped each phrase. 8 months of trying to understand what Chopin was feeling when he wrote it, all those years ago, homesick and heartbroken in a foreign land. And now, on this stage, in front of all these people who thought he was nothing, he let that understanding pour out of him. The melody grew stronger. The notes began to cascade, tumbling over each other like water over rocks. His right hand sang while his left hand built a foundation underneath. Steady and sure, the music swelled and retreated, like waves on a shore. In the audience, something was changing. The whispers had stopped. The smirks had faded. People who had been checking their phones were now staring at the stage with their mouths slightly open. A woman in the third row, who had laughed when he walked past, now had tears forming in her eyes. The boy in the blazer sat frozen in his seat. His face had gone pale. He had heard this piece performed by professionals, by competition winners, by students with decades of combined training, but he had never heard it played like this. Not with this kind of raw emotion, not with this kind of soul. On stage, the boy at the piano was no longer a poor kid in donated clothes. He was something else entirely. Something that couldn't be measured by money, or status, or pedigree. He was a vessel for something bigger than himself, and everyone in that auditorium could feel it. The music built toward its first climax. The notes came faster now, tumbling and racing, demanding attention. His fingers flew across the keys with a speed and precision that seemed impossible for someone with no formal training. But it wasn't just technical skill that made people catch their breath. It was the feeling behind every note. The longing. The hope. The fierce determination to be heard. Chopin wrote this piece when he was 25 years old, far from home, missing everything he had left behind. He poured all of that pain into the music, and somehow, across 200 years, a boy from the wrong side of the city understood exactly what he meant, because he knew what it felt like to be far from where you belonged. He knew what it felt like to miss something you never really had. He knew what it felt like to carry a sadness so deep that words couldn't touch it, and he knew that music, sometimes, was the only way to let that sadness out. The ballade moved into its quieter middle section. The storm calmed. The notes became gentle again, almost like a lullaby. He shaped each phrase with the kind of care that made people hold their breath, afraid that any sound might break the spell. In the back of the auditorium, his mother stood with her hands pressed over her heart. She had never heard him play before. Not really. She was always at work when he practiced, always too tired when she got home. She knew he went to the church every day, knew he loved the piano. But she had never truly understood until this moment what her son could do. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. She just watched, overwhelmed by pride and wonder, and a love so fierce it felt like it might swallow her whole. On stage, the music began to build again. This was the part that separated the amateurs from the masters. The section that demanded everything a pianist had to give. The notes came faster and faster, climbing higher and higher, building towards something explosive. His hands were a blur on the keys. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Every muscle in his body was focused on the music, on translating the storm inside him into sound. The piano sang and roared and wept, all at once, filling every corner of the massive auditorium. The judges had stopped writing on their clipboards. They just watched, transfixed. As a boy they had dismissed before he started playing proved them all wrong. The climax hit like a thunderclap. His hands crashed down on the keys with a power that seemed too big for his small frame. The notes exploded outward, filling the room with sound so intense it was almost physical. People in the front rows leaned back in their seats, as if pushed by an invisible force. And then, just as suddenly, the storm broke. The final section of the ballade is the hardest part. Not because of the technical difficulty, though that is considerable, but because of the emotion it requires. The piece ends, not with triumph, but with tragedy. The beautiful melody from the beginning returns, but it's changed now, broken, like a memory of something that can never be recovered. He played those final passages with tears running down his own face. He didn't care if anyone saw. He didn't care about the competition or the scholarship or proving anything to anyone. He was just playing for Mrs. Chen, who believed in him. For his mother, who worked so hard to give him a chance. For himself, the invisible boy who had finally found a way to be seen. The last notes faded into silence. His hands rested on the keys. He was breathing hard, like he had just run a marathon, and then nothing happened. For 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours, the auditorium was completely silent. Not a cough. Not a whisper. Not a single sound. He opened his eyes, suddenly terrified. Had he failed? Had they hated it? Had he embarrassed himself? Just like everyone expected? Then, from the back of the room, someone started clapping. It was one of the janitors. An older man who had slipped in to watch after finishing his shift. He stood alone, clapping slowly, his face wet with tears. Then someone else joined him, and someone else, and someone else. The applause spread through the auditorium like fire. People rose from their seats, one row at a time, until the entire room was standing. The sound was deafening, a thunder of clapping hands that shook the chandeliers and rattled the windows. He sat at the piano, stunned, unable to process what was happening. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to kids like him. There had to be some mistake, but there was no mistake. The applause kept coming, wave after wave, and he could see faces in the crowd. Some were crying, some were laughing with joy, some were shaking their heads in disbelief, as if they had just witnessed something impossible. The head judge, a stern woman who had barely looked at him when he walked on stage, was wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. The other judges were on their feet, applauding with everyone else. And in the third row, the boy in the blazer sat completely still. He wasn't clapping. He wasn't moving. He just stared at the stage with an expression that mixed shock, disbelief, and something that might have been shame. For the first time in his privileged life, he had seen what real talent looked like. Not the kind you could buy with money or lessons or connections. The kind that came from somewhere deeper. Somewhere that couldn't be taught. The applause continued for what felt like forever. He sat at the piano, overwhelmed, not knowing what to do. Finally, he remembered to stand. His legs were shaking so badly he could barely walk. He gave a small, awkward bow, and the applause somehow got even louder. As he walked off stage, he passed by the judge's table. The stern woman with the glasses reached out and touched his arm. Her eyes were still red from crying. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," she said quietly. He didn't know how to respond, so he just nodded and kept walking, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. In the back of the auditorium, his mother was waiting for him. She didn't say anything. She just pulled him into her arms and held him tight while they both cried. Around them, the applause finally began to fade. But something had changed in that room. Something that could never be undone. A poor kid in broken shoes had just silenced every person who ever doubted him. And this was only the beginning. The moments after he left, the stage felt like a dream. People he had never met were shaking his hand, patting his shoulder, telling him things he couldn't quite hear over the ringing in his ears. His mother stayed close to him. Her arm wrapped around his shoulders like she was afraid he might float away. The competition wasn't over yet. There were still other performers waiting for their turn. But something in the air had shifted. Everyone knew, even if no one said it out loud, that they had just witnessed something special. The other students who performed after him were good, technically skilled and well-trained. But the magic that had filled the room during his performance was gone. It was like trying to light a candle after watching a firework explode. When the last performer finished, the judges huddled together at their table, whispering and comparing notes. The wait was agonizing. He sat in the back row again, his mother beside him, trying not to hope too hard. He had learned a long time ago that hope could be dangerous. It could lift you up, just high enough, to make the fall hurt worse. But his mother squeezed his hand and smiled at him, and for a moment, he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. Finally, the head judge stood up and walked to the microphone on stage. The auditorium fell silent. "First of all," she began, "I want to thank everyone for participating in this year's citywide music competition. The level of talent we've seen today has been truly impressive." She paused, looking down at the paper in her hands. "However, in my 30 years of judging these events, I have never experienced anything quite like what we witnessed this afternoon." She looked up, and her eyes found him in the back row. "The winner of this year's competition, with a perfect score from all 4 judges, is our pianist, who performed Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor." The auditorium erupted again. People turned to look at him, clapping and cheering. His mother burst into tears beside him. He felt frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. This wasn't possible. Things like this didn't happen to people like him, but they were calling his name now, asking him to come to the stage. His mother gave him a gentle push, and somehow his legs carried him down the aisle and up the steps. The head judge met him with a warm smile and an envelope. $10,000, she said, pressing it into his hands. "A full scholarship to the summer music program of your choice. And something tells me this is just the beginning for you." He stared at the envelope like it might disappear if he blinked. $10,000. That was more money than he had ever seen in his life, more than his mother made in months of working double shifts. And it was his. He had earned it. The applause continued as he stood there, overwhelmed. He managed to say thank you into the microphone, though his voice cracked and his hands were shaking. Then he walked off stage, and everything became a blur of congratulations and camera flashes and people asking questions he didn't know how to answer. But in the middle of all that chaos, one person managed to reach him. She was an older woman, elegantly dressed, with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She moved through the crowd with the kind of confidence that came from a lifetime of being important. When she reached him, she extended her hand. "That was remarkable," she said simply. "I'm the director of the Whitmore Foundation. We sponsor music education programs throughout the city." She paused, studying his face. "Tell me something. Where did you learn to play like that?" He thought about lying, about making up a story that sounded more impressive. But something in her eyes told him she would see right through it. "A church," he said. "Street. Augustine's, on the east side. They have an old piano. I've been teaching myself there for 4 years." The woman's eyebrows rose. "You taught yourself? No private lessons? No conservatory training?" He shook his head. She was quiet for a long moment, looking at him like he was a puzzle she was trying to solve. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "I want you to call me," she said. "Tomorrow. We need to talk about your future." Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. He looked down at the card in his hand. It was heavy and expensive, with gold lettering that caught the light. His mother appeared at his side. "Who was that?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think she wants to help." The rest of the day passed in a haze. By the time they got home, the sun was setting, and he was more exhausted than he had ever been in his life. But it was a good kind of exhaustion, the kind that came from giving everything you had and finding out it was enough. His mother made dinner, a special meal to celebrate. They couldn't afford anything fancy, but she had picked up a small cake from the bakery down the street. It had white frosting and blue letters that said "Congratulations" in wobbly handwriting. They sat at their tiny kitchen table, eating cake and talking about everything that had happened. His mother kept looking at him like she was seeing him for the first time. "I always knew you were special," she said again, just like she had that morning, but this time, there were tears in her eyes. "I just didn't know how special. I'm sorry I was never there to hear you play. I'm sorry I was always working." He reached across the table and took her hand. "You were working for me," he said. "Everything you did was for me. That's why I could play today. Because of you." She broke down crying then, and he held her hand while she let out years of exhaustion and worry and sacrifice. They had been through so much together, just the two of them against the world, and now, finally, something good was happening. The next morning, he called the number on the business card. The woman answered on the second ring. "I was hoping you'd call," she said. "Can you come to my office this afternoon? There's something I want to discuss with you." Her office was in a tall glass building downtown, the kind of place he had only ever seen from the outside. A secretary led him to a room on the top floor, with windows that looked out over the entire city. The woman was waiting for him behind a large wooden desk. "Sit down," she said, gesturing to a chair. "Let's talk about what happens next." For the next hour, she laid out a plan that made his head spin. A full scholarship to Lincoln Preparatory Academy, the same school that had hosted the competition. Private lessons, with one of the most respected piano teachers in the country. Access to practice facilities, concert opportunities, everything he would need to develop his talent to its fullest potential. "The Whitmore Foundation exists to find young people like you," she explained. "People with extraordinary gifts who just need a chance. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I can count on one hand the number of times I've seen talent like yours." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "You have something special, something that can't be taught, and I want to make sure it doesn't go to waste." He listened to everything she said, trying to process it all. This morning, he had woken up in his same small apartment, in his same difficult life, and now a stranger was offering him a future he had never dared to imagine. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why would you do all this for me? You don't even know me." The woman smiled, and for a moment, her professional mask slipped. He saw something softer underneath, something personal. "Because 40 years ago, I was you," she said quietly. "I grew up poor. I taught myself music on a broken violin, and someone gave me a chance when no one else would." She paused. "Now, it's my turn to do the same for someone else." He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded, feeling tears prick at his eyes. "There's just one thing," she added, her tone turning serious. "This path won't be easy. You'll be surrounded by students who've had every advantage you didn't. Some of them will accept you, others won't. You'll have to work harder than everyone else just to prove you belong." She looked at him steadily. "Can you handle that?" He thought about the boy in the blazer, the laughter, the whispers, the word charity hissed behind his back. Then he thought about the music, the way it felt to sit at the piano and let everything else fall away, the way it felt to finally be heard. "Yes," he said. "I can handle it." The woman smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes. "Good," she said. "Then let's get started." The first day at Lincoln Preparatory Academy was everything he expected and nothing like he imagined. He walked through those marble hallways in a brand new uniform, the same uniform everyone else wore. And for the first time in his life, he didn't look different on the outside, but he still felt different on the inside. That feeling would take longer to fade. The foundation director had kept every promise she made. He had a full scholarship that covered tuition, books, and supplies. He had weekly lessons with a piano teacher who had trained some of the best musicians in the country. And thanks to an anonymous donor, a beautiful piano now sat in the corner of his family's small apartment, so he could practice whenever he wanted. His mother cried when they delivered it. She stood in the doorway and watched as two men carefully carried the instrument up 3 flights of stairs, and she cried like she had never cried before. That piano represented everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed. It meant her son had a chance she never did. But school itself was hard, not the academics. He had always been smart, and now that he wasn't worried about money or food or keeping his head down, he discovered he actually loved learning. His grades were near the top of his class within months. No, the hard part was the people. Most of the students at Lincoln Prep had grown up together. They had attended the same summer camps, the same birthday parties, the same exclusive events. They had inside jokes and shared histories and connections that went back generations. He was an outsider, and everyone knew it. Some students were kind. They smiled at him in the hallways, invited him to study groups, asked genuine questions about his life and his music. But others were not so welcoming. They whispered when he walked past. They made comments about scholarships and charity cases. They reminded him, in 100 small ways, that he didn't really belong. The boy in the blazer was the worst. His name didn't matter. What mattered was that he had never forgiven what happened at the competition. He had been the star of Lincoln Prep's music program, the one everyone expected to win. And then, a nobody from the East Side had shown up and taken everything. He made sure to remind him of his place whenever he could. A shoulder bump in the hallway. A cruel joke just loud enough to hear. A sneer during music class when the teacher praised his progress. It was never anything big enough to report. Never anything that would get him in real trouble. Just a constant, grinding pressure designed to make him feel small. Some nights, he lay in bed and wondered if it was worth it. He could go back to his old school, back to being invisible. It would be easier, safer, less painful. But then he would sit at his piano and play, and he would remember why he was doing this. The music never judged him. The music never cared where he came from, or what he wore, or who his parents were. The music just wanted to be played, and when he played it, everything else fell away. So he kept going. Day after day, week after week, month after month. He practiced until his fingers ached. He studied until his eyes burned. He took every cruel comment and every cold shoulder and used it as fuel to work harder. And slowly, things began to change. His playing improved in ways he hadn't thought possible. His teacher, a serious woman who rarely gave compliments, told him he was making progress faster than any student she had ever taught. The other students in his music class started paying attention when he played. Even the ones who had been cold to him began to show something like respect. By the end of his second year, he was invited to perform at the school's annual winter concert. It was the most prestigious event of the year, attended by parents, donors, and important people from across the city. Only the best students were asked to perform. The night of the concert, he stood backstage and felt the familiar knot of nerves in his stomach. But it was different now. He wasn't afraid of being judged. He wasn't worried about failing. He was just excited to play. When he walked on stage and sat at the grand piano, the applause was warm and genuine. He looked out at the audience and saw his mother in the front row, wearing a dress she had saved for months to buy. He saw the foundation director, smiling proudly. He saw his teacher, sitting straight with her hands folded in her lap. And in the third row, he saw the boy in the blazer. His rival. His tormentor. The person who had tried so hard to make him feel worthless. Their eyes met for just a moment. Then he turned to the piano and began to play. He had chosen a different piece this time. Not Chopin. Something newer. More personal. A composition he had been working on himself, inspired by everything he had been through. The struggles, the loneliness, the moments of despair, and the moments of triumph. All of it poured into the music, transformed into something beautiful. When he finished, the standing ovation lasted for 5 minutes. People were crying. His mother was crying. Even his stern teacher had tears in her eyes. But the moment that mattered most came later, after the concert ended and the crowds began to leave. He was packing up his sheet music when a shadow fell across him. He looked up and saw the boy in the blazer standing there, hands shoved in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I just wanted to say..." The boy paused, struggling with words that obviously didn't come easily. "I'm sorry. For everything. The things I said. The way I treated you." He looked down at his expensive shoes. "I was jealous. You had something I didn't, and I didn't know how to deal with it. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth." He studied the boy's face, looking for the catch, the joke, the hidden cruelty. But there was nothing there, except genuine shame, and something that might have been admiration. "Why now?" he asked. The boy shrugged. "That piece you played tonight. The one you wrote yourself." He shook his head slowly. "I've been playing piano my whole life. I've had the best teachers, the best instruments, every advantage, and I could never write something like that, not in a million years." He finally looked up, meeting his eyes. "You have a gift. A real gift. And I spent 2 years trying to tear you down instead of learning from you. That was stupid. And I'm sorry." He didn't know what to say. He had imagined this moment so many times, dreamed of the day his rival would finally admit he was wrong. But now that it was happening, he didn't feel triumphant. He just felt tired. Tired of the fighting. Tired of the walls between them. Tired of being enemies. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the piano bench. The boy looked confused. "What?" "Sit down. Play something for me. I want to hear what you've been working on." The boy hesitated, then slowly sat beside him on the bench. He placed his hands on the keys, took a breath, and began to play. It was good. Really good. Not the empty technical perfection from the competition 2 years ago. Something had changed. There was feeling in it now. Depth, like he had finally started to understand that music was about more than just hitting the right notes. When he finished, they sat in silence for a moment. "You've gotten better," he said. The boy smiled. A real smile this time. "I've been practicing." 3 years later, he performed his debut concert at Carnegie Hall, the greatest concert venue in the world, the place where legends were made. His mother sat in the front row, dressed in clothes he had bought her with money from his first professional performance. The foundation director was there, beaming with pride. Mrs. Chen had passed away the year before, but he had dedicated the concert to her memory, and in the 5th row, his old rival sat watching. They were friends now. Real friends. The kind that only comes from going through something hard together and coming out the other side. When he sat at the piano and played his first note, the music that filled Carnegie Hall was the same pure sound that had once silenced a mocking crowd in a high school auditorium. But now it echoed through one of the greatest stages in the world, heard by thousands who had paid to witness something extraordinary. In the back of the hall, a young boy watched with wide eyes. He was poor, like someone else had once been poor. Invisible, like someone else had once been invisible. But as he listened to the music, something sparked inside him. A tiny flame of hope, a dream that maybe, just maybe, he could do something like this too. The cycle was beginning again, and the music played on.